The dining room glowed with candlelight as the Whitmore family, 12 in all, raised their wine glasses to say grace. The wine sparkled red, and soon, tragedy would strike. This is the story of how Clara, an enslaved woman, used patience and poison to change the fate of a Mississippi plantation. Clara stood quietly by the kitchen door, hands folded over her apron, watching the family begin their meal on a sticky August evening in 1847. The air was thick with the scent of roasted duck and sweet magnolia flowers drifting through open windows. Hidden beneath it all was a faint, sharp smell nobody noticed, poison carefully mixed into the food. The Whitmore plantation stretched across thousands of acres near Natchez, where the Mississippi River curved through the land. Judge Cornelius Whitmore ran the estate with a firm hand, just like he ruled in court. His wife, Margaret, oversaw the household, including 47 enslaved people, with what she called kind but strict management. Their 4 grown children, along with spouses and grandchildren, had gathered to celebrate the judge's 62nd birthday, filling the house with chatter and laughter. Clara had been bought at an auction in New Orleans 11 years earlier, torn from her 2 young daughters, who were sold to another plantation. She never saw them again. In the Whitmore kitchen, she worked unnoticed, cooking meals so delicious the judge bragged about them to his friends. "Pass the duck," Margaret said to her son, unaware that Clara's eyes followed every move. The poison, bought as rat poison from a local store, was easy to get. Clara had been saving it for months, hiding it in a secret spot behind the flour. She knew exactly how much to use, just enough to be deadly without changing the food's taste. Little Emma, the 6-year-old granddaughter, poked at her vegetables. "These taste odd, grandmother," she said. "Eat up," Margaret replied. "Clara's cooking is perfect." Clara had laced the poison into the sauce on the duck, the cream on the vegetables, and even the birthday cake waiting in the kitchen. Every bite carried a hidden danger. The family ate on, talking about cotton and parties, unaware of the poison working its way through their bodies. Judge Whitmore raised his glass for a toast. "To family and success," he said, his voice starting to waver, though he blamed the wine. By 7:45, chaos erupted. Emma got sick first, and her mother rushed to her side but soon collapsed. The judge tried to stand, his face turning red, hands at his throat. One by one, the family began to shake and fall. "We've been poisoned," someone cried. They looked toward the kitchen, but Clara was already gone. The dining room turned into a scene of panic. Chairs tipped over, people slumped to the floor. The youngest son crawled toward the door but didn't make it. Margaret, struggling to breathe, screamed Clara's name. Meanwhile, the other enslaved people in the house moved slowly. The footmen didn't rush for a doctor. The maids kept folding laundry. A stable boy saw Clara slip toward the river with a small bundle but stayed quiet. The Whitmore plantation was a vast cotton empire, and Judge Whitmore's birthday had brought the whole family together. Clara, who had lost everything, had planned her revenge carefully. She'd bought the poison bit by bit, storing it safely. Her cooking skills hid the danger, and her quiet presence made her invisible to the family. As the night wore on, the family's fate was sealed. By 10 o'clock, most were gone, and only Margaret clung to life, holding her husband's cold hand. She whispered a name, Bessie, an enslaved woman who had died years before when the judge refused to call a doctor. The household staff finally entered, standing silently, watching without helping. By midnight, the house was still, the family gone, and Clara was far away, moving toward freedom with a new name and stolen papers. The next morning, the plantation woke to a grim scene. The dining room held 12 bodies, the birthday cake untouched. The enslaved people faced a tough choice: report the deaths and face questions or seize a moment of freedom. Ruth, Clara's friend and the head housemaid, acted first. She searched the judge's study, finding papers that listed her as property. Some suggested burning everything and claiming bandits, but others knew the truth wouldn't stay hidden. The enslaved people whispered urgently in the quarters, knowing that one wrong word could mean disaster for them all. Upstairs, the dining room was a grim scene, untouched since the night before. By morning, a field worker named Jupiter was sent to the nearby Turner plantation with a carefully planned story. The Whitmore family had fallen ill during dinner, and despite everyone's efforts, they didn't survive what seemed like bad food. Clara's name wasn't mentioned. Her friends claimed she'd been sold to a Georgia plantation weeks earlier. Court records from August 19, 1847, backed their story, noting Clara's supposed transfer to the Belmont estate. Ruth, the head housemaid, had forged the sale document, using ink she mixed that morning and aged with coffee and smoke. She'd practiced the signature countless times, a skill she learned from Clara, who had secretly taught her to read and write despite the risks. When Sheriff William Donovan arrived with the coroner, Dr. Marcus Webb, at 9:43 a.m., they found a house in staged disarray. The enslaved workers played their parts well, some crying over their lost owners while others scrubbed at stains. Ruth greeted them, eyes red from onion juice, her voice shaking. "It happened so fast, Sheriff," she said. "They were celebrating and then," she pointed toward the dining room. Dr. Webb, a careful doctor trained in Philadelphia, examined the bodies. He noticed their red skin, small pupils, and dried foam at their mouths, clear signs of arsenic poisoning. He estimated it would have taken a large amount of poison and asked, "Who made the meal?" Ruth answered calmly, "We all did. Clara started the sauces before she left. I finished cooking, Samuel cut the duck, and Letty handled the vegetables. If something was wrong, we all had a hand in it." Her words cleverly spread responsibility, making it hard to pin blame. The kitchen was spotless, cleaned overnight to hide any traces of poison. The rat poison in the pantry matched its purchase receipt exactly. But Dr. Webb spotted one clue, a magnolia petal on the kitchen floor, carried in from the river path where no magnolia trees grew. Someone had been out that night, somewhere they shouldn't have been. The sheriff ordered a search of the cabins and outbuildings, but found only worn clothes and simple belongings. No letters, no books, no hint of the secret school Clara had run for 3 years. Those papers had been burned and scattered in the garden before dawn. By noon, news of the deaths spread across Adams County. Families locked their doors, suspicious of their workers. Some fired their cooks, others made their enslaved people taste every dish before eating. Meanwhile, Clara, now calling herself Sarah Coleman, was on a lumber wagon driven by Josiah, a free black man tied to the Underground Railroad. She'd crossed into Louisiana, her forged papers passing a quick check. Hidden in the wagon were 3 other runaways, but Clara rode openly, acting as a seamstress headed to Baton Rouge. Back at the plantation, the investigation grew intense. With no living Whitmore heirs, the estate's future was unclear, leaving the 47 enslaved people in limbo. Sheriff Donovan questioned each worker, searching for lies, but Ruth's story held strong. Clara was sold, the family ate as usual, and the illness came suddenly. She showed fake letters, written in advance, claiming Clara was happy in Georgia. Dr. Webb's autopsies confirmed arsenic poisoning, pointing to deliberate murder, but with Clara supposedly gone, the case stalled. That evening, the enslaved community gathered to pray. Between hymns, their eyes met, silently agreeing to stick to the story. Old Moses, his hands scarred from the judge's cruelty, led the prayer, "Lord, may the departed find peace." They knew the real test was coming, keeping their story straight as pressure grew and rewards for Clara's capture were offered. Then a telegram arrived. There was no Belmont plantation in Georgia. Sheriff Donovan stormed into the kitchen, waving the paper. "You've been lying," he said, his voice low and dangerous. The 6 workers stood still, Ruth keeping her face calm despite her pounding heart. She'd learned to hide her true feelings to survive. "Tell me what really happened to Clara," Donovan demanded. 20 miles away, Clara sat in the colored section of a steamboat, heading up the Mississippi. She clutched a rosary, playing the part of a free woman bound for Memphis. A newspaper headline screamed about the 12 deaths, with a reward offered for the Negro cook. Ruth, thinking fast, let tears fall. "Clara was never the same after her daughters were sold," she said. "She talked about a cousin in Georgia who could help her. We let her go because we were scared of what she might do." The sheriff studied their faces, but they gave nothing away, skilled at hiding their thoughts after years of survival. Meanwhile, lawyers and distant relatives swarmed the plantation, eyeing the land and people like property to claim. Donovan launched a massive search, sending riders to every road and river crossing with Clara's description. A woman about 30, 5'4", with a small scar on her hand. But Clara was ready. She'd lightened her skin slightly, changed her hair, and wore stolen gloves to hide her scar, blending into her new identity. Investigators found a journal in Clara's cabin, written in code. Dr. Webb decoded it, uncovering not recipes but poison plans and a list of names, other plantation families who died mysteriously over the years. Clara had worked in their homes, quietly earning trust before striking. The Whitmores were her final act before vanishing. Tests on old bodies confirmed arsenic, sending fear through Mississippi. Families locked their kitchens, hired food tasters, or cooked their own meals, terrified of their workers. On the river, Clara overheard passengers debating the murders. One called for chaining all household workers at night. Another said it proved black people couldn't be trusted. Clara gripped a hidden vial of poison, her last resort if caught. The manhunt grew, with a $2,000 reward and slave catchers tracking her. Ruth had sabotaged their dogs sent with pepper, but Clara's real escape came from the Underground Railroad. Strangers, a minister, a shopkeeper, a farmer, passed her along, risking everything for her freedom. At one stop, a slave catcher nearly caught her, but an elderly woman named Aunt Cora stalled him, claiming ignorance with a smile. Clara moved on, her trail hidden. Back at the plantation, a harsh new overseer, Patterson, questioned even the children, but they stayed silent, trained by Clara's lessons. The community held firm, protecting her escape as the investigation closed in. The enslaved people stayed tight-lipped, saying Clara kept to herself, always talking quietly about her lost daughters. A young boy, barely 8, looked the cruel overseer, Patterson, in the eye and said, "Clara told me poison could taste better than sugar if you used it right." The room froze, but Patterson just laughed, dismissing it as a child's odd tale. Ruth had coached the boy to say something strange enough to be ignored. Far away in Ohio, Clara reached a safe house run by kind Quakers who only asked her first name. She didn't use Clara or Sarah, but her birth name, Adun, meaning beloved in her mother's language. For the first time in 30 years, she felt a taste of freedom, whispering her true name in the dark. But danger still loomed, as the hunt for her was far from over. Back in Mississippi, Sheriff Donovan made a breakthrough. He spread maps across the courthouse table, marking each place Clara had struck with red X's. The marks formed a line heading northeast, showing she wasn't running aimlessly, she had a destination. Dr. Webb, the coroner, noticed more than geography tied her targets together. "Look at the families," he said. The Hendersons sold people to the Bogarts, whose daughter married a Lancaster, and Margaret Whitmore was born a Henderson. A dusty 1836 document from the judge's files revealed the truth. Clara and her 2 young daughters, aged 3 and 5, had been sold at a New Orleans market. Donovan whispered, "She's hunting the families who took her daughters." In a small Ohio church, Clara, still posing as Sarah Coleman, listened to a sermon about freedom. The singing stirred memories of her pain. After, the minister's wife, Mrs. Harper, saw her distress and asked, "What's wrong, Sister Sarah?" Clara mixed truth with her story. "I'm looking for my daughters, taken from me years ago. I heard they went north, maybe to Canada." She said their names, Patience and Grace, her voice cracking with real emotion. She didn't mention the years spent tracking them, bribing for information, or how she'd made the Lancasters and Bogarts pay for buying her girls, even after they'd been resold. In Mississippi, fear gripped the plantation owners. The governor called Clara a danger to society, raising the reward for her capture to $5,000. Patterson terrorized the Whitmore enslaved community, questioning them daily, withholding food, and separating children from parents to force answers. But they held strong, their silence a shield. A letter between plantation owners urged harsh punishment, claiming the workers knew more than they said. Old Moses, worn down by hunger at 71, mumbled in his sleep about a teaching tree. Patterson seized on it, demanding answers. Moses admitted Clara taught reading under an oak tree, saying knowledge was power. This news sent panic through Mississippi. Clara could read, write, and plan, making her far more dangerous. Orders went out to test every enslaved person for literacy, with punishment for those who could read. Ruth stayed calm, knowing Moses had shared a truth that led nowhere. The teaching tree was ashes now, burned the night of the deaths as Clara had planned. Donovan's maps showed Clara likely followed the escape route to Ohio, maybe Canada. Alert every city along this path, he ordered. She's ahead, but someone's seen her. In Cincinnati, Clara shed her Sarah Coleman identity, dressing plainly as a laundress and working at a boarding house in a community that protected its own. She listened closely, gathering clues about her daughters, who might be teaching at a school in Ontario. A letter she'd found years ago described two young women with her daughters' ages, one with her careful hands, the other with a singing voice like hers. Clara held on to details: Grace's crooked pinky, Patience's crescent-shaped birthmark. But Dr. Webb found a clue in Clara's coded journal, her unique way of writing the letter G, with a curled base, matching lists and the forged sale document. She can change her look, but not her writing, he told Donovan. They checked boarding houses and churches for that telltale G. Clara, unaware, wrote a letter to an Ontario school about two teachers, signing it with her distinctive G. Authorities intercepted it, tracking her to Cincinnati. At 4:17 a.m., a sharp knock hit the boarding house door. Clara grabbed her poison vial and bundle, hearing boots on the stairs. The owner, Mrs. Washington, stalled the officers with confusion. "Officers at this hour?" she asked. Deputy Franklin pushed past, describing a woman matching Clara's scar and height. Slave catcher Briggs, who'd traced her handwriting, was sure she was there. Clara slipped toward the back, but men blocked the alley. With no way out, she grabbed a wash basin and a new headscarf, stepping into the hallway as a washerwoman. When Franklin bumped into her, she dropped the basin, splashing his boots. "Oh, sir, you scared me," she said, using a different accent, looking older and tired. "Just a washerwoman here for the linens." Her scarred hands stayed hidden in the soapy water. Franklin asked about a new boarder, but she said, "I only see dirty clothes, sir." Briggs paused, sensing something in her stillness. "Show me your hands," he demanded. As he spoke, a door slammed upstairs, distracting him. Clara threw the water in his face and ran out the front door. Dawn lit the Cincinnati streets as she sprinted, Briggs shouting, "That's the poisoner." With no swamps to hide in, she darted through alleys, jumped a fence, and scattered chickens in a yard, running with the desperate speed of someone who'd fought for every step toward freedom. Clara sprinted toward the Ohio River, its wide waters marking the line between slave states and the hope of freedom. Crossing meant needing papers she no longer had. Her breaths came hard, the small vial of poison bouncing against her chest with every step. One sip could end it all on her terms. But the thought of her daughters, possibly just across the river, pushed her forward. She reached the docks as sunlight broke through, steamboats looming like sleeping giants. Dock workers paused, staring as a black woman in plain clothes ran from armed men. "Stop her!" Deputy Franklin shouted. $500 for whoever catches her. That promise turned heads. Workers who might have ignored her now saw a reward. Clara dodged ropes and crates, but the men herded her toward the pier's end, where the muddy river churned from recent rains. 7 men closed in, blocking her escape. Slave catcher Briggs stepped forward, rope in hand. "It's over, Dune," he said, using her true name like a weapon. Clara gripped the vial. "You know nothing about me," she said. Franklin replied, "We know you poisoned 12 people, including women and children." Clara's laugh was sharp. "You talk of children? Where was your justice when my daughters were sold? When I begged to see them one last time?" Her words carried over the growing crowd. Free black people, Irish workers, even some curious whites. She stood at the edge, speaking truths rarely heard. "Your laws call me property, my daughter's property. Our lives mean nothing to you." She held the vial high. "I reject your laws." Men moved closer, but stopped when she raised it to her lips. "I've served poison as food for 11 years. Today, I choose my own path." Dr. Webb pushed through, fresh off the morning train. He'd studied Clara's journal and knew her heart. "Your daughters," he called. "I traced them. A Quaker family bought them together, took them to Canada. They're teachers now, free, using the names you gave them, Grace and Patience. Clara's hand shook, hope flickering. You're lying, she said, but her voice wavered. Webb pressed on. Grace has your hands. Patience sings in church. They're free because you fought for them. The crowd held its breath, the river lapping below. Clara stood between capture and death, past and future. If I drink this, I die free, she said. If I surrender, I die a slave. Only one way is mine. She looked toward Canada, imagining her daughters' faces, their hands, the lessons she'd taught them to hide their brilliance until they were safe. Then she spoke to Webb, to the crowd, to history. Tell my daughters their mother loved them enough to do anything. Tell them I chose my own end. As men lunged, Clara made her choice. Not the vial, not surrender, but the river. She leaped into the churning water, vanishing like a secret kept safe. They searched for days, but the river gave up nothing. 3 bodies washed ashore that month, 2 white men and an elderly black woman, but none were Clara. The Ohio guarded her like a mother. Sheriff Donovan stood on the Cincinnati docks at sunset, October 1st, watching boats drag nets through the water. No body, no proof, no justice, he said. But some wondered what justice meant for a woman who'd lost everything to avenge her children. Dr. Webb stayed in Cincinnati, drawn by Clara's story. Her journal showed not a monster, but a mother who turned pain into a plan, using kitchen skills as weapons. In his notes, he wrote, "The river says she couldn't survive, but Clara outsmarted everyone for 11 years. Survival was her skill." At the boarding house, Mrs. Washington denied knowing Clara, her words practiced and smooth. But Webb found a hidden compartment under a floorboard, $37, a train schedule for Canada, and an unfinished letter in Clara's handwriting. My dearest daughters, if you remember your mother, she'd been so close to reaching them. Days later, a farmer downstream reported a missing boat and clothes from his wife's line. His wife saw a figure at dawn, moving carefully, favoring one side. Webb recalled Clara's journal mentioning her old shoulder injury, but he kept quiet. The Whitmore plantation was sold, its 47 enslaved people split among new owners. Ruth landed near Jackson, teaching reading in secret, carrying on Clara's work. Old Moses passed that winter, his secrets buried with him. The poisonings changed the South. Kitchens became places of fear. New rules banned enslaved people from handling food alone or buying supplies, but the fear lingered. Those seen as powerless held power. Patterson, the harsh overseer, died suddenly of illness, though the enslaved community's calm reaction hinted at more. Clara's lessons under the teaching tree went beyond letters. In Cincinnati, as fall painted the riverbanks gold, the search ended, declaring Clara dead by drowning. But whispers spread in Bucktown. A woman seen gathering herbs by the river, a familiar face on a train north, money left for families hiding runaways, always $37. Webb visited Grace and Patience in Ontario, now young women running a school. They'd taken the name Freeman, leaving slavery behind. We heard about the poisonings, Grace said, her hands like Clara's. Patience added, she sang us to sleep with old songs, taught us to read with flour on the table. They read Clara's journal, faces unreadable, but that night, neighbors heard singing ancient melodies of grief and hope. Clara had poisoned 12 people, maybe more, tracking her daughters with fierce precision. She'd built a web of secrets and vanished into the river when capture loomed. Sightings came from Detroit, Chicago, Boston. A woman in a kitchen, a letter in her handwriting, money sent to the enslaved. Donovan's final report, December 22, 1847, called her deceased, case closed. But Webb kept searching, finding small poison purchases along her path, nothing obvious unless you knew her ways. On Christmas Eve, an unmarked letter arrived at Webb's hotel with a pressed magnolia blossom from Mississippi, its faint scent a silent message. He burned it, deciding some truths were better left free. Back in Mississippi, he resumed his work, keeping Clara's journal hidden, reading it late at night. Her words blurred the line between healing and harm, showing how the same hands could save or destroy. Clara's story, epilogue. The Ohio River hid its secrets, and somewhere, perhaps Ontario or Chicago, a woman who might be Clara lived free. The river never gave up her body, guarding her story. 20 years later, in a Chicago boarding house, Martha Washington taught cooks with care. The secret's purpose, she'd say, stirring soup. Her scarred hand, gloved, blended into her common name. The State Street kitchen welcomed black travelers and immigrants chasing new lives, smelling of onions and hope. Chicago rebuilt after a fire, rising like a story that endured. At dusk, Martha paused, thinking of her daughters, Grace and Patience Freeman. They visited in 1868, elegant but distant, calling her Mrs. Washington. The 2-hour reunion shared their teaching lives but couldn't heal the past. "We understand," Grace said, her hands like Martha's. They sent formal letters, signed "Your Daughters in Freedom," kept with $37 and an unneeded vial. In 1867, a newspaper reported a $1,847 donation to a black children's school, matching the Mississippi poisonings year. Martha's boarding house sheltered runaways post-slavery, teaching them to change their walk, forge papers, and spot danger. She never mentioned Mississippi, but it lingered, testing dishes, locking spices, waking from nightmares calling Emma, Cornelius, Margaret. A cook, Sarah, asked about Martha's scarred hands. "Every scar's a story," she said. "Some stay quiet but find their way." Dr. Webb died in 1871, leaving a letter confessing he'd falsified Clara's case, identifying a scarless body to close it. "Some justice lies beyond laws," he wrote. His son burned Clara's journal, but read her survival notes, stretching hope, loving lost children, turning anger into action. In 1882, Clara Freeman, Patience's daughter, arrived. "My mother named me for someone brave," she said. Studying medicine, she learned Martha's chemistry, herbs to heal or harm. "Knowledge is strength," Martha said, echoing old lessons. Martha died in 1885, a chosen dose, her death her own. At her funeral, Emma Whitmore, spared as a child by Clara, left a magnolia blossom. Smuggled out, raised by abolitionists, she owed her life to Clara. The boarding house thrived, run by Clara Freeman, serving food and wisdom. In 1923, Clara's journal was found, its final words, "My daughters are free." Her story lives in kitchens blending love and resolve, exposing a poison system. Southern towns still whisper of the Whitmore deaths, 12 gone, a cook vanished, justice served or lost.